Well, a lot of things happened with you and NCAB, but one thing that really happened, Bob, was it really helped your knowledge and it helped your confidence as far as being an operator of a radio station. And at this time, you were the general manager, and the Fountains owned 100% of Coastal Plains Broadcasting.
That's correct.
But you wanted to be an owner.
That's right, too. I said if radio broadcasting is going to be my full career, my major career in my life, then I would like for the possibility of going to ownership. And prior to that, I built up a little higher profile because and I was beginning to get offers for jobs for larger companies, that if you'll come to work for this company, you will be able to buy some stock in the company and you'll be given a raise in salary, etc. So I liked Harper and wanted to stay in this area and wanted my children to come up in this area. So that's when I went to the major Congressman L.H. Fountain, but the owner V.H. Vinton Fountain and his brother R.M. Fountain. And I went to them about buying half interest in the company.
Yep. So you went to the owners and said, hey, look, boy, we're doing pretty good here, and I've got a lot to do with that, but I really want to own part of the company, and I want to buy 50% of the stock.
That's correct. And I believe R.M. Fountain had passed away at the time, and so the owners then was L.H. Fountain, and Congressman L.H. Fountain also owned not a 50%, but maybe 25% or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And they were the owners. And so...
What'd they say?
I went to them and said about I wanted to buy half interest into the company. And Mr. Fountain said, well, I'll have to think about that. And then he talked to his sons, which were Vint Fountain Jr. and Mac Fountain. And they basically told their dad, says, look, we got a good manager here, the company is doing better than ever. I don't want to say, one day we're going to inherit this, aren't we? And he said yes. Says, well, we don't want to have to be looking for new, inexperienced, or unproven managers.
Yeah.
So we think it would be a good idea to sell Bob half interest in the company.
So they said yes, but that's just the beginning. You had to have some money.
Absolutely. Well,
how did that work?
I had to try to raise enough money to bring this about.
Yeah, they didn't want to finance it. They wanted the money.
Well, Vinton Fountain said he would finance it.
Okay.
Congressman L.H. Fountain said that he needed all of his money up front.
He was somewhat of a more minority stockholder.
Yeah, he did. He was not a 50%.
Yeah. He wanted some money out of the
deal.
Yeah.
He wanted to get out of the whole thing. And so, but Vinton Fountain was willing to finance mine at a decent interest rate. So I had to raise enough money to buy out L.H. Fountain.
Mm-hmm.
So I had some rental property back then. Mm-hmm. Actually, they were mobile homes, but it was rental property, and I had a number of those. And so I sold all of those, and I had a VA for my veterans insurance thing. Anyway, I got all the cash out of that. I got all the cash I could out of everything that I had.
Your benefits, yeah.
Came up $1,200 short.
Oh, gosh.
And so that's when I finally went to my dad, who was still living back then out on his farm, and I told him what the situation was, and could he possibly loan me $1,200, but I insisted on paying him interest.
That was quite a bit of money back then.
Pardon?
That was a lot of money back then.
Yeah, it was, but
for a retired farmer to give you $1,200.
He had long had the farm paid for
Yeah.
and everything else, and was living in the village of Leggett then, and so he immediately did so, and I says, well, I'm going to pay you interest on it. And so that's what I did until finally we paid down to a few $100s, and he insisted on forgiving it up.
Wow.
So that led to me being able to buy half interest into the company.
So, Bob, how did you determine what the radio stations were worth at that time? How did somebody come up with the price?
Well, you would basically...
Was it based on cash flow?
It was based on cash flow, what the gross was,
Yeah.
but mostly on cash flow. And then the locations of the station, what the past records of the station was, and so forth. And apparently we came out pretty good in that.
Good for you.
And so they placed a value on it, and that's what happened.
So let's go to the fact that you're now not only the general manager, you're a 50% partner with the Fountain family. You own 50% of the stock, and you recognize that if you're going to grow, you need an infusion of capital to be able to do a couple of things. To make your stations more powerful, you need to be on a taller tower. You need an increase in power. You need some equipment. Basically, you guys need to get together and put about $300,000 into your radio stations. That's a lot of money. What did the Fountain say when you went to them and said, partners, here's what we need to do?
Well, basically I believe that if we do this, of course it's going to cost around $300,000 or so to do this, but if we do this, I think it's going to make the company, we'll be able to build a taller tower, go full power, and we'll be able to increase our audience, how you can hear us, and actually we would be here, you could hear us right on up to the city limits of Raleigh.
Wow.
You couldn't put a city grade signal in there. But I said, with this, I believe that we can have raise our rates and have a much larger audience. And if we do a good job in programming, we're going to raise our income quite a bit too.
So you would reach into cities that you really weren't reaching or not reaching clearly, creating some new markets for you, opportunities to sell ads.
Correct.
And you did that. You got the money. You got permission from the FCC to do a tower. And, you put your creative skills to work when you went out to try and find some land to, and I kind of like this. I think I'm going to borrow this.
Okay.
To buy some land to put the tower on. You went to a realtor and you had an interesting proposition. Tell us how that worked.
Well, I went to the realtor. I asked about who was one of the better, most honest realtors in that area. And they gave me this gentleman's name. And so I went to see him. And I said to him, I understand that when someone buys some property or sells some property, that you are paid by a percentage of what the sale was. And he said, that's correct. And I says, well, I want to buy some land, but I want to buy it at the least expense possible as long as it is more than it would normally bring. And I said to him, I says, I don't want any land that is good for farming at all. That you could raise tobacco on, peanuts, cotton, or whatever. I want it to be the sorest, no good land that exists.
To get a better price.
We don't care.
Yeah.
And I want it to be, pay a fair price for it, and more than what they normally would bring, so the seller would be interested in selling it.
Wow.
And so he said, and I says, I'd like to pay you on how less you can get as long as it's more than what it would normally get.
So you gave the real estate salesperson an incentive that you would pay him more to negotiate harder for the land that you needed.
As long as it was above what we normally bring.
Wow.
And his bit would be paid, his commission would be paid on it being sold for that lesser amount, as long as it was above what it would normally sell. And I don't think he had ever been approached with something of that nature, but he agreed to do it.
Well, you were successful. You found a tract of land. You got your tower put up. You opened a sales operation and a small studio in the city of Rocky Mount to expand.
Yes.
And you became a much larger player in local radio than just being the hometown Tarboro station. You became a broadcasting force in many communities in eastern North Carolina.
That's correct. We opened up, rented a little office over in Rocky Mount. and I had two full-time salespeople over there. One was George Peterson, and the other was Dottie Freeman. And they did an excellent job. Now, George, he was working with a radio station already doing sales and was very well at doing it, but they were not paying him as much as they should have been paying. And so when I offered him a higher guaranteed wage plus commission on his sales, that was how I managed to hire him.
You know, Bob, something interesting that I read in your book is your focus and knowledge and the importance of hiring quality people and paying them what they're worth. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, some people seem to, when they are doing a business, let's hire the cheapest people we can, you know, whoever we can get to do the job. And some of them actually thought that we can pick up somebody off the street and they can be a disc jockey. No, that's not the case. You need to find somebody that's, they don't have to be a college graduate, but they have to have a pretty good IQ. They have to have certain necessary things. And usually, if you do a good live interview and you ask the right questions, you will get the right answers. And you may have to question them several times. And then I always ask them to ask me questions about how the job would be if I hired them.
Wow.
And so that was what I wanted both myself, the company, and the employee to be satisfied, and both of them be qualified.
And that was a formula for success.
That, in my opinion, is.
Let's kind of recap here. You have had a remarkable transformation. You've been in the military. When you got out, graduated from ECU. You went from a part-time to a full-time position at WCPS-AM and FM in sales to become the general manager at the age of 26. After working in radio for 18 months, you have immersed yourself with the State Broadcast Association, the North Carolina Association of Broadcasters. You've approached and you have successfully purchased half of Coastal Plains Broadcasting. You're now 50-50 partners with the Fountain family. You all have invested in what you've got. You've raised your towers, you've gotten permission, you've expanded your signal, and FM in all of this is now changing the roles of FM stations. AM has been the king, is still the king, but FM stations are evolving, and you have a vision for KCPS-FM to have its own separate format. Let's talk about that.
That's correct, and FM was becoming much stronger than before. You had FM radios on automobiles.
Yeah, for the first time.
Yeah, and so FM was becoming a real force, and you could forget the idea about frequency and forget money. It could be the real money maker.
I like that FM, forget money. And in fact,
in the early days, that's what it meant too.
And North Carolina Association of Broadcasters, they'd have meetings different places, and they'd expose you to things. And as you traveled around, some of the call letters and some of the marketing slogans caught your attention, and it started you thinking about if you were going to do something with the FM station, what might you do? What were you thinking at that time? What are some of the things?
I like the idea of the possibility of a radio station, other than just the call letters, have some kind of logo too that was kind of catchy, and people would file it away in their mind and remember it. And I remember in traveling some, I'd always listen to the radio and listen to different radio stations. I remember listening to one radio station, I believe the call letters was WOWO, and they called it Whoa Radio. And so I said, well, that's pretty cool. And then I was looking for call letters for the FM that I thought would be catchy, and I could come up with a logo that would be memorable to the listeners. And so I did some research on what call letters would be available.
Now, you're also thinking about having a country music format.
That's correct.
So you wanted call letters that also may be tied into your format.
That's correct.
What'd you find out?
Well, I went looking for call letters, And I wanted something that I thought would be catchy, and I could come up with a logo such as Whoa Whoa. And so I came across the call letters of WKTC being available.
WKTC.
Right.
Okay.
And for some reason, in my mind, the name Katy came up.
KTC.
Yeah. And so I decided to call it WKTC Katy Country.
Ah.
And so back then, country music was becoming more and more popular. And it wasn't just the good old country boys that were interested in and liked country music. It was doctors and lawyers and, you know, a lot of people liked country music. And it wasn't just the country boys. And so I decided that I would go with the format with country music primarily, and go try to get the highest power we could and come up with that a logo that people would remember. And so that's when WKTC, Katy Country, was born.
My gosh. Well, you did something else. And we talked about your youngest daughter, Lee, a little while ago. You decided that you would incorporate a very unique soundbite, I guess we call them, a statement from Lee in your IDs and things. So tell us what Lee did and how that became.
Well, she was only about 8 years old, I think, at the time.
Yeah.
And so I went to the recording area in the studio, and I'd have her stand in front of the mic, and in her little 8-year-old voice, she'd say, "My name is Katy, and I listen to Katy Country," and then I would tickle her right as soon as she said Katy, and she would giggle at the end.
So
and that became the logo.
Oh my gosh, that
and
was
we
clever.
used that on the air, and that's how WKTC Katy Country was born, so to speak.
Wow, and it became a powerhouse station. We'll talk about that in just a few minutes, but I want to talk about your oldest daughter, Janice.
Yeah.
She also got in the business. She went to UNC
University
Chapel
of
Hill,
North Carolina,
Yep.
and majored in radio, TV, and motion pictures.
That's what it was called at that time, radio,
That's right.
TV, and motion pictures.
Yeah, she got a degree in that.
When she graduated, she went to work in radio. Where did she go to work?
Well, she went to work at WRAL-FM in Raleigh, and went in sales.
Wow.
And became very, very good at it. And in fact, I think she was recognized. You may have that. I don't have that by memory, but she was recognized at a meeting up there, which I went up there for that. And I was very proud of what she had accomplished.
Yeah, in 1983, she was WRAL-FM salesperson of the year.
Yeah.
Yeah, recognized by the Raleigh radio executives.
That's correct.
A very prestigious honor, and that is wonderful. Well, gosh, such a great history. And we want to backtrack just a little bit to talk about a couple of things, but I think some things that are very interesting in your career, and that is that, small towns in North Carolina like Tarboro, or some of the larger ones, Rocky Mount, or, Leggett, the village of Leggett. We don't get a lot of celebrities or movie stars that visit, but Tarboro had a number of instances where people had come to visit. And in fact, one of them, Joan Crawford, movie star, came to visit while you were an employee. In fact, you were the newest employee at that time. And the general manager of the station at that time talked to several people because he wanted to send the best person out to interview Joan Crawford. What happened?
Well, I was kind of a movie buff back then, and so I was familiar with who Joan Crawford was. And I knew that the manager of the station was going to pick one of us guys to interview her. And so I decided that I would go to the library and do some research on Miss Crawford. And so I did. And I got a lot of information about her background and everything else. And so when the manager interviewed the different guys that were employed there, the disc jockeys, etc., about who would interview Miss Crawford, one most of them just said, well, we'll just ask them how to like Tarboro, et cetera, very simple things. And then when they asked me, I'd done all this research about Miss Crawford and about her background. And I don't remember all of it now, but I've got it in the book.
Yeah, you had some very interesting things that tied into her movie career.
Yeah, and so I ended up interviewing her live.
The newest employee of WCPS goes out, and you are, because of the questions and the background work you had done, you have the opportunity, to interview Joan Crawford during her visit to Tarboro.
That's correct.
That had to be exciting.
That's correct. And of course, Pepsi-Cola was a part of the sponsor, and I've got a picture right there of my interviewing her.
Wow.
It's on my computer back in the back. You'd look at it later. Interviewing her, and of course the Pepsi-Cola bottle is sitting there on the table for that. I think her Steele is his last name that was that brought that about.
Yeah.
But it's very unusual that I was able to interview some pretty famous people that happened to be coming through Tarboro.
Let's talk about another one, and one that I was not as familiar with, but in doing some of my research on this, found it very interesting, and that is Mercedes McCambridge.
Yes.
And here's something that I found. Orson Welles called Mercedes McCambridge the world's greatest living radio actress.
Well, I didn't know that, but I did manage to meet her, and
And she was in movies also.
yes, she was.
She was a movie star.
And I met her. She was doing a tour, going to different places and at that time I was a member of the Edgecombe First or something, and one of the projects, it turns out that she was had once been an alcoholic, and she was doing a tour then, speaking to people about alcoholism and her past and that sort of thing. And so she came to Tarboro, and I got a telephone call saying that she was there and would I like to come out and interview her. And I said, for sure. And so I went out and to interview her. Miss McCambridge it is, I guess. And so I went out there and went in, and someone pointed out who she was, and I'd never seen a picture of her, I believe, but they pointed out to her that I was the guy that was going to interview her. So I went over to introduce myself to her, and of course I said WCPS, but apparently it came out like CBS.
She thought you were CBS.
And she thought I was from CBS. Well, immediately she gave me a big hug and says, "That's wonderful. I'm still getting residuals from you." And I didn't have the heart to correct her. But anyway, we went over and sat down, and I did a good interview with her, and she was telling me all about some of the famous people that she knew in Hollywood, etc., that were alcoholics. Some real big surprises.
Yeah.
I don't really remember all of them.
But her tour was to educate people about alcoholism
that was her purpose and the reason that she was on this tour.
And, a couple of other things. She was a radio voice star, but in her debut film in 1949, in All the King's Men, she won an Oscar for Best Supporting Actress. And for people that maybe aren't old enough to remember that, they probably remember the movie The Exorcist.
That's correct.
She was the voice of the demon. And in fact, in the first print that came out, they did not give her any screen credit.
That's right.
And she sued them.
Yeah.
And forced them to go back and redo that to identify her as the voice of the demon in The Exorcist, Mercedes McCambridge. A very interesting story, and you had a chance to meet her. But let's talk about a North Carolinian that was very famous, that came to see you, and it was 1985 in Tarboro, and a fella that people loved, who was the men's basketball coach at NC State by the name of Jim Valvano. Yep. He was on the road, and let's start again, a guy by the name of Jim Valvano, and he was on the road, and he was promoting raising funds for cancer research.
That's correct.
Ironically, not connected to this visit or any kind of precursor, he later passed away from cancer. A very sad early ending for a legend, a basketball coaching legend in our state. But he came to Tarboro. How did you hook up with Jim Valvano?
Well, he came there to a golf tournament, and the purpose of that golf tournament was to raise funds for cancer research.
And Jim loved to play golf, but also, Bob, you were an avid golfer too.
Pardon?
You were an avid golfer also.
Oh yeah, I enjoyed playing golf. I really didn't take it up until I was in my 50s, but I enjoyed playing golf.
Yeah.
It's really the only sport I ever really played, and was never real good at it, but I had one hole-in-one and one eagle, and that was my best golf.
My gosh, well, that is wonderful. But anyway, Jim came, you guys played golf together, you had a great time, and Jim came to your home.
He did. He came to my house, and we had a swimming pool in the backyard. It wasn't this house, but it was another one that I could show you later if you needed to see it.
Okay.
But anyway, had a swimming pool in the backyard, and Jim wanted to go swimming. And
He didn't bring his trunks.
he didn't bring his trunks, and he says, well, Bob says, do you have a set of trunks that I'd use? I said, I've got some. I says, but your butt's bigger than mine, and I don't know if you'd get into them or not. And he says, well, let me try. And so he did, and he managed to get into them.
Well,
And so he went out and dived into the pool. And meanwhile,
Oh, my gosh.
some friends in the neighborhood and all around, the word got out that Jim Valvano was at my home. And so people started showing up wanting to see this famous guy, Jim Valvano. And so they showed up, not a lot of them, but probably 30 or 40 or whatever.
Well, that's a pretty big crowd for word of mouth.
Yeah. And so they came in, and Jim was, when he got through swimming, he got out, he was very gentlemanly, and talked to him and signed autographs and that sort of thing.
Well, that was great.
And any event, I'll never forget that. And I was up there, and I think it was in Raleigh, when he made that famous speech of his when he found out that he only had about 30 days to live.
Yeah, I'd been diagnosed with cancer, and he came out publicly.
He'd been diagnosed with cancer.
Yeah.
And it's part of it was never give up.
Yeah.
Never give up. That was what he was part of what he was talking about that time. And I remember somebody saying something about, says, you just got 30 seconds to go. And he says, you telling me I just got 30 seconds to go when I ain't got but 30 days to live?
Yeah.
And whoever it was, they said, you let him talk long as, who was ahead of it, says, you let Jim talk as long as he wants to.
Yep.
But he was a wonderful guy, and I'll never forget having met him and being there when he made that speech.
Yeah, he was a guy with a lot of energy. He motivated and encouraged and mentored so many people, and it was a terrific loss to all of the state of North Carolina. I want to talk about one other famous person that you interacted with, and they were a Tarboro native. Now, for people that maybe aren't as involved in golf, they may not know this name, but this gentleman was a superb golfer. He never turned pro. He was a Tarboro native and an American golfer by the name of Harvey Ward. Harvey Ward was from Tarboro. And,
that's correct.
You had a chance to interact with him because you lived in Tarboro also.
Oh yeah, and Harvey, he never turned professional until after he retired.
Yeah.
But he was one of the better golfers that ever played the game. And there was a book written about it. I believe the title was The Match. And that's when Harvey was on one of the teams playing, and I've got that in my book. My memory doesn't serve me correctly right now, but some of the top golfers there.
It was a match played in 1956 at Pebble Beach, one of the world's most famous golf courses. Golf Magazine called it the greatest match ever played, and the book is by Mark Frost, and the subtitle, it's The Match, and the subtitle of the book is The Day the Game of Golf Changed forever. And if you're interested in that, please read the book. But let me tell you some things about Harvey that you may not remember off the top of your head. 1952, he won the British Amateur.
Correct.
1955 and 1956, he won the U.S. Amateur Championship.
At a
So
very
he's
young
both won the
age,
British, yeah, and he had beat the likes of some very famous golfers, Arnold Palmer, and some others. This guy was
He was quite a golfer.
yeah. Yeah,
One of the best.
but he chose to be a pro at a golf course and not pursue the professional line of golf. And you also had an opportunity to interview and interact with him.
That's true.
And what a great person he was.
Yeah, I managed to play a couple of 9-hole events here in Tarboro with Harvey. And we had a Harvey Award Day, had it in my backyard at that time. And Harvey was there, and we borrowed a microphone and everything so he could speak to the crowd. And at least 100 people showed up or more at my house on that Harvey Award Day.
Well, you interacted with a lot of famous people. You had many contributions to the North Carolina Association of Broadcasters. Not only were you the president in 1972, in 1985, North Carolina Association of Broadcasters gave you the Distinguished Service Award for all of the things that you did. And I want to talk about something else that you did that I think is remarkable and very honorable. In 1973, the Vietnam War was going on, and Governor Bob Scott asked you to serve as the chairman of the POWMIA Committee for Prisoners of War and those missing in action. How did Governor Scott know that you would be the guy to do that?
I'm sure Wade Hargrove had something to do with that.
I think you're
that's
probably
the only
right.
That's the only
Wade
way.
didn't tell me that, but I imagine you're
I've
right.
always said that I think Wade had more confidence in me than I had confidence in myself.
Yeah.
But anyway, Wade thought I could handle it. And
Yeah.
so when they asked me to do it, I said, well, I should do it.
Well, and you received a number of honors for that. The League of Families of American Prisoners and Missing in Southeast Asia, the North Carolina chapter recognized your efforts, and several other groups. But you did such a great job, Bob, that not only did the Governor Bob Scott want you to do that, and you were only 39 years old at the time. It was a non-paying position. You had a plate that was full, but you still, because of your dedication to community service and how you cared for people in North Carolina, you agreed to take that on. But after that, Governor Jim Holshouser was the governor, and he asked you to continue.
Yeah, he asked me to, would I consider continuing to do that? And I said, sure, I don't see why not. And so I felt like it was something that did some good, and if I could help in it, I should do it. It would be, I had no reason why I shouldn't.
Well, and Governor Scott was a Democrat, and Jim Holshouser was a Republican. It was not a political
No, it wasn't
pull.
a political thing.
No.
Let's just try to do something that was.
You did it for the
needed
love
to
of
be
your
done.
country and the love of North Carolina, and I think that's tremendous.
Right.
All stories have a middle, a beginning, and an end. Business enterprises have a beginning, a middle, and an end. The day came when you thought that maybe it was time to sell your radio stations. Tell us about that.
Well, I'd gotten to the point that I thoroughly enjoyed I knew then that I had picked the career that I wanted, but it came the time then that I felt like that it was time to retire so I could spend more time with my wife, Judy, and my children, and do some more traveling. And I had the all-expense-paid trip to Korea and back, and visits to Japan, and other places in the United States, and so forth. But I thought it was time for me to retire and spend more time with my wife and with my children, who were virtually grown then. And so that's when I decided it was time to sell the company.
Were you still partners with the Fountains at that time?
Yes.
So your ownership continued as a 50-50 partner. How'd you find a buyer?
Well,
Well, let's stop for 1 second and say you have built this company as their general manager and owner into something much bigger than anyone ever imagined. Katy Country, the FM country station, was a huge success, both in the ratings and in the finances, financially.
Right.
You had something really worth having for someone out there that might be interested in buying stations.
yes, that's correct.
How'd you find a buyer?
Pardon?
How did you find a buyer?
Well, we tried to use the system. There was a way that you could appraise the value of a radio station.
How'd you do that?
Based on the gross income and the bottom line and of the real estate, et cetera, a number
Right.
of things that you came about being able to do that. And so I was able to come up and talking with my partners and talking with others with about 3 different values on it. One, the least we would take for it, then the next, and then the top.
So you and your partners agreed on some
We
parameters.
agreed on the sale. I was ready
Yeah.
to retire, and they didn't
Yeah.
want to get new management, new
Yeah.
partners, and anything else. They were ready to sell too if we could sell it for a proper amount.
So you had met another radio operator at North Carolina Association of Broadcasters meetings, and through your involvement, a fellow by the name of Don Curtis.
That's correct.
Well, tell us about Don.
Don's a fine guy. I met him during the conventions that we went to at the NCAB, and he was a little bit younger than I am, and he was a nice guy. Got along with him good, and he was interested in buying the stations.
He admired what you had done, and he recognized the value of the audiences that you had built. And how'd you get together?
Well, I don't know. He asked me probably what would we consider, and I talked with my partners and everything, and we came up with some prices that we thought was reasonable and that would be logical and would be fair. And so we came up with those prices and approached Don with that.
Did he agree?
Yes, he did. I think that I was on my partners left it up to me.
Oh,
They told me, says, Bob, whatever you decide to do.
wow. What trust in a partner.
And so,
Well, that speaks loudly
And-
for you, Bob, as far as for our partners to say, hey, look, you go ahead and handle the transaction, and whatever you decide, we have confidence in you.
well, that was the way it was. And so we reached an agreement, and I would be talking to them, to my partners, on the telephone or whatever communications I was having, and I would say something to Don, so well, wait a minute, let me talk to them. And then usually we didn't have much to say because we'd already made our decisions on what we would take and what
Yeah.
we wouldn't take.
But you were able to complete the sale of the station, and today it is still owned by the Curtis Media Group.
That's true.
Wow. And still a great station.
It is. I don't keep
Still
up
Katy
with
Country.
it like I used to,
Yeah.
but it is. And Don was a mighty fine guy, and hopefully everything is still going well with him.
Well, and your vision and creativity in taking WCPS-FM, turning it into a country format, making it Katy Country, still is vibrant and very profitable today. That's something to be very proud of.
Well, I do have some pride in it. I mean, I felt like that perhaps I know now that it was the career that I really was cut out for.
Well, you have had quite a career, and of course we haven't been able to cover every single thing that you've done, but you're not done yet. What is next? What's next for Bob Harper?
Well, I don't know really, because at the age of 84, I don't know how much you can. I'm enjoying my retirement. I'd like to go back and play a little golf, but I don't. At this age, it's not a whole lot more that I think I can do, but just enjoy what I've done in the past.
Well, you still live in Tarboro. You're
Yep.
still a vibrant member of this community. And we really want to thank you for sharing all the details of your broadcasting career as part of the rich and significant history of broadcasting here in North Carolina.
Well, thank you.